The Raijintek DELOS RBW is a small air CPU cooler that is designed to work in small enclosures and systems. While being small, this cooler uses no less than 3 fans and 6 heat pipes, and of course it has the now standard addressable RGB LED system. However, can such a small cooler be up to the task of cooling high TDP CPUs? We shall see in this review. The Raijintek DELOS RBW is a small form factor air CPU cooler that uses no less than 3 fans to deliver its cooling performance. While this CPU cooler has been on the market for some time now, it has remained one of the few models to use a triple fan configuration and no less than 6 heat pipes, among other things like addressable RGB, direct touch heat pipes, and an all-black heatsink and cables. The DELOS RBW is available for around $50 to $58 and that means that this CPU cooler will compete with pretty much the entire budget-oriented air CPU cooler market. In terms of the design, the DELOS RBW is a good-looking CPU cooler. It has an all-black heatsink and cables and 3 small 92mm fans for its active cooling. However, the highlight of this CPU cooler in terms of the design is the addressable RGB functionality, which is located around the top of the heatsink. These LEDs will illuminate the lower part and the sides of the plastic heatsink cover. In addition, the Raijintek logo found in the center is illuminated as well. Overall, this is quite a good look for a CPU cooler. It's RGB but just enough to enhance your system and not too much to cover everything in its color and light pattern. The heatsink of the DELOS RBW has a dual tower design with a height of just 136mm, and this is with the RGB cover included. This CPU cooler is good for low clearance cases and small form factor systems. Each of the 2 towers of the heatsink uses 32 aluminum-made cooling fins to dissipate the heat from the CPU. These fins are bent on the edges, as is the case these days for many air CPU coolers. This design element has 2 purposes. First, it will increase the structural integrity of the heatsink as each cooling fin is supported by those located above and below it. And second, the airflow is channeled through the heatsink and out the back of the CPU cooler. To move the heat away from the CPU, the DELOS RBW has 6 copper-made heat pipes, each with an outer diameter of 6mm and a lovely coating of paint on the top. In addition, the baseplate of the CPU cooler is made from the before mentioned heat pipes, and yes, the DELOS RBW has a direct touch heat pipe design for its baseplate, a good one at that, as it has no gaps and no irregularities in its surface. The fans used on the DELOS RBW are 92mm in dimensions and have a maximum rated speed of 2000 RPM and a minimum speed of 600 RPM. These fans use a hydraulic bearing system and have an estimated lifespan of 40,000 hours. Other than this, there are no redeeming features of these fans, not even rubber pads on the corners of the fan frame to dampen the vibrations. The good thing is that the DELOS RBW uses 3 of them and each can be individually controlled through PWM. Before we talk about the accessories, we need to talk about the packaging. The packaging looks good, but it's too bad that it offers absolutely no protection to the cooler at all. I have seen packaging like this before and it never ends good for anything that is inside the box. Why didn't Raijintek include at least a cardboard tray inside is something that I ask myself to this day. In terms of the accessories, the DELOS RBW has the usual. You get a splitter cable which allows you to power all 3 fans from a single motherboard fan header. And that's it. You get a user manual and the components of the mounting system, which includes a backplate, a mounting bracket, 4 threaded bolts, 4 metal nuts, 4 thumb screws, 4 insulating spacers, 2 standoffs, 2 mounting screws and 4 Intel double-threaded screws. You also get a mounting bar and a small pack of thermal compound. The installation is an interesting process, and the same can be said for the mounting system. You first get the backplate and insert the threaded bolts into the back of it. Afterwards, you place the backplate at the back of the motherboard, and on the front, you install these insulating pads. Afterwards, you secure the backplate by threading in these large nuts over the bolts. Finally, you place the mounting bracket over the studs and secure it with these thumb screws. But you are not done, as you need to install the 2 standoffs on the mounting bracket, and then you need to place this mounting bar on the top part of the base of the CPU cooler, and then you are still not done, as you need to secure the mounting bar with these small screws. And you are done. Don't forget the 3 fans and to connect them to the adequate fan headers on the motherboard. And with the cooler installed, we can see that somehow the DELOS RBW manages to be a small CPU cooler yet still interfere with the RAM slots of the motherboard, an ATX motherboard at that. Outside of that, the DELOS RBW is looking good, especially with the RGB LEDs turned on and synchronized with the LEDs of the motherboard. In terms of the clearance, there is approximately 34mm of space between the sides of the heatsink and the backplate of the graphics card, and in terms of the RAM clearance, the DELOS RBW will completely cover the first RAM slot and interfere with the second slot. Before we head into the testing and performance, you will get to hear a noise sample of the CPU cooler with all its fans going from their minimum rated speed to their maximum. I am doing this because while a decibel value is a useful metric for CPU cooler comparison, it does not take into account additional noise sources such as the fans vibrating on the heatsink, bearing ticking, and so on. And with three 92mm fans spinning at a maximum of 2000 RPM, the DELOS RBW reached a maximum noise output of 46 decibels, with the measuring device placed at the standard distance of 10 cm away from the CPU cooler and the system. This value places the DELOS next to the Fractal Design Celsius Plus S24 Dynamic and the Alpelphone Glacier Water 240 High Speed. This noise output was expected because while these fans are small, they do spin at 2000 RPM and you have 3 of them at the same time. The testing of each CPU cooler is done with an Intel i9 9900K running both at its factory frequency and settings and overclocked manually to 5 GHz on all cores. This is done to push each tested CPU cooler to its limits and differentiate CPU coolers that are good enough for daily usage and coolers that can handle CPU overclocking. The first test uses the Intel Burn Test V2 benchmark, a synthetic benchmark that simulates a CPU load that you will encounter in your daily usage, especially in gaming. And in this test, the DELOS RBW has a maximum temperature of 70 degrees Celsius with the CPU overclocked to 5 GHz on all cores and an ambiental temperature of 26 degrees Celsius. This places the DELOS next to the Noctua NH-D9L. However, the next test is where each CPU cooler is pushed to its limits, some even above that, as this test uses the FPU system stability test of the AIDA64 Extreme software. This test will create an unrealistically high load for the CPU, something which you will rarely if ever encounter in your daily usage. In fact, the only quote-unquote natural CPU load that gets even close to this is heavy video rendering with the CPU as the only rendering unit, and in this test the DELOS RBW reached a maximum temperature of 92 degrees Celsius with the same 26 degrees Celsius ambiental temperature. This places the DELOS next to the Be Quiet Shadow Rock Slim. Seeing these results, we can safely say that the Raijintek DELOS RBW is a good CPU cooler that can handle an overclocked i9 9900K. However, overclocking on such a small CPU cooler is not recommended as there is so much heat that this small heatsink can dissipate before it's too much. In addition, this CPU cooler is designed for one purpose, to cool a decently sized CPU while inside a small form factor system, so keep that in mind when you make your purchase. While the Raijintek DELOS RBW is a good CPU cooler in terms of cooling, especially for its size, it has a few issues. First, the packaging is not great. In fact, it offers little protection for the cooler inside the box. Second, the mounting system is secure but needlessly complicated. While other manufacturers are trying to simplify and improve their mounting systems, the DELOS RBW has a mounting system that feels and looks outdated, a system which relies on too many parts and parts that are so small that you can easily lose them. The three 92mm fans do perform in terms of moving the air through the heatsink, however, they are also loud at over 40 decibels. One must wonder if better fans could have been used to at least lower the overall noise output of the cooler and improve on the looks. And it is unfortunate that the DELOS has these shortcomings, as this is otherwise a great little CPU cooler which packs a lot of features, 6 copper-made heat pipes, a dual tower heatsink and plenty of cooling fins. The DELOS RBW is a good CPU cooler that will work great with many gaming systems that can only use small CPU coolers. If you don't require a CPU cooler that has a height of under 140mm, then you might as well look elsewhere and look for something bigger, easier to install and quieter. And at this price point of under $60 there are plenty of choices. If you like this review, then you might consider subscribing for more, and if you want to support me in a direct way, then in the description below you will find the links for both the Patreon and the Substar pages of this channel.